And good evening once again. Welcome to another Friday night live stream. I'm Rod Saunders from Jew and Greek. This is Friday, March 14th in the year of our Lord 2025. And tonight I'm going to be talking about the Robert Morris indictment, in case you haven't already determined that from the thumbnail and the title. A lot of people are doing videos on this topic, but I thought that I'd give you my perspective on it because I think it's probably going to be a little bit different from what you're going to hear from other channels. I'm going to wait a couple of minutes to see a few more people pop in, and then we'll get started. If we have some power issues here, don't panic. We've got very strong winds here in the Tulsa area right now. It's like straight winds of 20 miles an hour, gusting up to 40 or 50. It's been a very breezy day here in the Sooner State. And that could knock some power lines down, possibly could cause some trees to fall over and knock power lines down. There's all kinds of things that can go wrong when you have sustained winds like this. So we'll just see what happens. As far as I know, there's no severe weather as far as tornadoes or anything. But that's always a possibility in Oklahoma too. And that's just they say March winds and April showers bring May flowers. This is just part of living in Oklahoma. It's Oklahoma where the wind comes sweeping down the plains. It's sweeping today. And over toward the panhandle of Texas, it's even worse. They're telling people not to go outdoors. The winds are so strong out there. So it could be worse. Anyway, as far as I know, the power is okay. I haven't heard about any fires or power outages, but it's always a possibility. Okay, let's see. We've got Flame, Ava Greenfeather, Kendra, and Brother John Elving. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining me tonight. I'm going to start off by going through the Julie Roy's report on Robert Morris's indictment. They've been talking about this for, well, let's say the story broke in June, and they've been talking since June about possibly bringing charges. But because of the statute of limitations in Oklahoma, everybody said, well, that wasn't possible. But they did it anyway. And we'll get into that here in a minute. But here on Julie Roy's site, it says, disgraced Gateway Church founder Robert Morris has been indicted on 5 counts of lewd or indecent acts with a child, according to press release by the Oklahoma Attorney General's office. The indictment stems from incidents that began around Christmas 1982 when Morris's alleged victim was 12 years old. If you follow the story, you know about Cindy Clemishire, and this went on for several years. Shortly after the allegations became public, Morris resigned from Gateway, one of the largest megachurches in the country. And it goes on, says, previously it was thought that criminal charges could not be brought because the statute of limitations had expired in this case. However, the statute of limitations is not applicable in this case because Morris was not a resident or inhabitant of Oklahoma at any time, the press release stated. There can be no tolerance for those who sexually prey on children. This case is all the more despicable because the alleged perpetrator was a pastor who exploited his position. The victim in this case has waited far too many years for justice to be done. The Oklahoma Attorney General's office said the criminal behavior occurred when Morris was a traveling evangelist and would visit the family of the alleged victim in Hominy. Hominy is just a little city, probably about a half hour away from Tulsa. He and his wife, Debbie, were family friends and often stayed in our home when he was preaching at my dad's church. Morris was 21 to 25 years old at the time and a pastor. He was like a youth minister at Shady Grove Church in Grand Prairie, which is a suburb of Dallas, which is now Gateway Church Grand Prairie campus. Okay. If you remember the video that I did last year, I talked about this whole Robert Morris story, how he was on staff at the Grand Prairie Church, Shady Grove. It was a Pentecostal Baptist church, basically. And he got himself in trouble. They put him through this restoration process, and then eventually they let him start preaching again. He developed a very large following. People in that church really seemed to like him. Apparently, promises were made that when the pastor retired, he would be the head pastor of that church. When the pastor retired, the pastor's son became the pastor instead of Robert. Now, I've actually been to Gateway a few times. I went through the orientation class at Gateway. It's in Southlake, which is the suburbs just north of the Dallas-Fort Worth airport. And during the orientation, here's the story that they told us. They said, excuse me, that back in around 1999, Robert Morris approached the leadership at Trinity Fellowship in Amarillo, Texas, which at that time was pastored by Jimmy Evans, who we all know about from the Daystar kerfuffle. But Jimmy Evans was the lead pastor at Trinity Fellowship in Amarillo. Apparently, he knew Robert because Robert had a large following in Texas anyway. So he goes to leadership at Trinity Fellowship, and he says, I feel that God is leading me to start a new church in the Dallas area. This is the way it was told to us. He felt led of the Spirit to start a new church, and he approached the Trinity board and the pastor, and they all prayed about it, and they all felt that this was of God. So they laid hands on him and commissioned him in this work. And the implication was made that they also gave him a little startup money. And of course, the church just exploded, which was supposed to be a confirmation that this was of God. Well, now we know that the story was a little bit different. The story is Robert didn't become the lead pastor at Shady Grove, and he was not pleased. And so he decided to go 15 miles down the road and start a new church. And he approached Trinity Fellowship and apparently did not inform them about his past, at least, not the whole truth about what happened. And they got behind him, and the church grew. And then 20 years later, 20 plus years later, this all comes out. So it wasn't as spiritual as these people doing the orientation led us to believe. And I'm sure that they were doing it in good faith. This is what they had been told. So this is what they were telling us. But it just wasn't that simple. It was, a lot of this had to do with church hurt. Robert was hurt because he got passed up. He felt like the promise was broken. So he went down the road, started another church. That church exploded. A lot of people left Shady Grove to go to Robert Morris's church in Southlake. And eventually, Shady Grove became their Grand Prairie campus. So he got his revenge on Shady Grove. He just gobbled up their church once his church exploded. That's kind of the story about how Gateway grew. Now, why am I giving you all this background? Just to let you know that the story of Gateway was kind of spun for people to believe that everything that was happening was of God. And knowing what I know now about Robert Morris, I said in that video last year, and I'll say it again, Gateway should have never been started. Robert Morris was disqualified from ministry. He never should have been restored to ministry. But they did things different back then. Back then, the pastor would get himself in trouble by doing something stupid like what Robert Morris did. And the leadership would say, okay, let's see if we can, work this out. We're going to sit you down for a while. You can't preach. No need to go to the law enforcement about this. We'll try to keep it under wraps, but you got to mind your P's and Q's, and you got to learn your lesson and not do this again. And so they take them out of the pulpit for a while, and then eventually, when they felt like they'd learned their lesson, they would restore them. Now, in the case of Robert Morris, I don't see any evidence that he ever did anything like this again. So from that standpoint, I guess he was restored, but he should never have been restored to ministry. These days, you do something like this. You go to the pastor and say, hey, I messed up. I got involved with yada, yada, yada. And the pastor or the leadership of the church will say, just a second. 911? Yeah, I'd like to report a crime. They'll go right to the police today. Because if they don't, they're going to be accused of covering it up. And they don't want their church and their ministries dragged down with this bozo who got himself in trouble. So things have changed a lot over the last 30, 40 years, where they used to try to cover it up a little bit and try to work with the guy. They don't work with you anymore because they know that they'll go down with you if they try. So you get in trouble. I mean, from a criminal standpoint, yeah, they'll report the crime and they'll let the police handle it. I know of a church where a similar situation happened. Somebody anonymously said, this guy on your staff has been messing around with kids. And it was just an anonymous note, so they didn't have anything else to go on. They called the guy in, they confronted him, they said, we got this report about you doing this, and he denied it. They had nothing else to go on. And people make false allegations all the time. So they just said, okay, well, you can go on about your business, carry on. And then a second report about the same guy came in. And the pastor's like, okay, one report I can overlook, but two, he calls the guy back into his office and he says, we've got two reports now on the same thing. What's going on? And I want the truth. And the guy confessed, and they called the police. But they got accused of covering it up because they said, you knew about this. And he said, no, I didn't know about it. We get false allegations all the time, and we had nothing else to go on. But as soon as we knew that something had happened, we called the police. Well, that wasn't good enough for some people. But anyway, the pastor, from that point on, his policy was every allegation that's made, we call the police. We let them investigate it. They didn't want to do that before because they didn't want to bring in the possibility of the media getting involved and reporting it when it wasn't true. You could ruin somebody's reputation. Somebody that's totally innocent, their reputation could be ruined over a false allegation if you go to the police and the media gets a hold of it. That kind of stuff happens. But the attitude now is, hey, you got your problems, we've got ours. Okay, sorry if your reputation gets damaged, but we're not going to sacrifice our ministry on the chance that you're innocent. So, things have changed a lot over the years. And I don't think it's any coincidence that you've got people like Dr. Michael Brown, who is 70 years old, Mike Bickle, who's about 70, Steve Lawson is in his 70s, and Robert Morris is 63. These are all baby boomers. And they came up in a time where people tried to, cover things up. And like I said, tried to work with you on these things. It's just the way things were done back then. For the record, Cindy Clemenshire's dad found out about it, but he didn't file charges. Why? People keep saying, I don't understand why her father didn't file charges. It was a different time. They did things differently back then. I can't really explain it. It's just like segregation. Okay. My parents were segregationists. A lot of people today don't understand that, but that's just the way it was back then. When I was a kid, everybody smoked. I don't mean everybody, like 100%, but, smoking, majority of the country smoked. I don't know anybody who smokes anymore. But smoking was it was cool back then to go around with a cigarette. And the country has changed. We have a different attitude toward that. So this is just one of those things. It doesn't excuse it. I'm not trying to say, hey, boys will be boys, but that was kind of the attitude back then, and that has changed. So that might give you a little bit of context about what's going on now. They say that Robert Morris is supposed to turn himself in next week. Last I heard, he was in Israel. And somebody said he was in Greece. I don't know. I'm waiting to see. I wonder what the over-under is on Robert Morris skipping the country. There are countries that don't have an extradition treaty with the United States. Among them are places like Bahrain and Bangladesh, places like that. If you want to hide out in a country, in a Muslim country or a poor country, yeah, you can avoid the extradition treaty. But there are nicer countries where he could hang out. Vatican City doesn't have an extradition treaty. Vietnam doesn't. Taiwan doesn't. So there are the Maldives. That's really nice. There's not much there except resorts. But yeah, he could hang out in the Maldives. They don't have an extradition treaty. But I tend to think that he will face this thing because I don't think this is going to hold up. I'll just be honest with you. From what I've heard, now I read to you from the Julie Roy's report that they said, well, he was from outside of the state. He was not a resident of Oklahoma. And so the statute of limitations doesn't apply to him. What I understand that they have done is they've taken an old law from the 19th century that was written because of cowboys that would come into a state and commit crimes. And then after the cattle drive, they leave town and they need to track these guys down. They get a posse formed, and it takes a while to track the guys down. They don't want a statute of limitations on tracking down these cowboys who committed crimes, or cattle rustlers who come into your state and steal cows and drive them across the state line. This is a law that has not been enforced, and it's just an outdated law that they've drudged up to use against Robert Morris, which means it is very flimsy from a legal standpoint. My guess, and I'm not a legal expert, but I don't think this is going to hold up. I think it's going to be thrown out, because you can't just go around looking for old, outdated, irrelevant laws to charge somebody with, because the current law doesn't allow you to charge them. This is known, I got it in my notes here. This is known as desuetude. Desuetude is a doctrine of outdated laws. You can't use outdated laws to prosecute somebody. If it hasn't been enforced in years and years and it's considered obsolete, but it's still on the books, no, you can't. This is a reason that we don't enforce sodomy laws anymore. There's a lot of sodomy laws still on the books, but we don't enforce them anymore because that was from a different era. I don't think this is going to hold up. And I know it's going to make a lot of people mad, because a lot of people, they just basically, they're vindictive. I don't think they want so much justice. They don't like Robert Morris because he's rich and famous, and he's got lots of houses and lots of money, and he's lived in luxury for years, and they just don't like the guy. And so they want to see him suffer in prison. But I think it's questionable whether it would be justice for the man to spend the rest of his life in prison for something that would have gone away 18 years ago if he had just paid her $50,000. That's all. Supposedly, that's all he needed to do, was pay her $50,000 and she would go away. But she didn't want to sign an NDA. And he didn't see the point in paying her $50,000 if she didn't sign an NDA, because then she could just come back later and ask for more money, more money, more money, more money. And so to end the deal, he says, okay, I'll give you $50,000, but you've got to sign the NDA. She wouldn't sign it. So he didn't give her anything. In retrospect, he probably should have just given her $500,000 and said, go away. Will you sign an NDA for $500,000? But he didn't negotiate with her. And now here he is paying the price all these years later. But I don't think this is going to come to prison. I think they're going to probably either work something out in civil court, or it's going to be thrown out upon appeal or something. We'll see. Let me go to the chat box here and see what you guys are saying. Let's see. Extradition living in a Muslim country as a Christian or prison seems similar. Depends on the Muslim country. Some Muslim countries are more tolerant of Christianity. A lot of people don't realize that before Saddam Hussein was overthrown, Christianity was much more freely practiced in Iraq, because Saddam Hussein's right-hand man, Tariq Aziz, I think was his name, he was an Eastern Orthodox Christian. Saddam didn't fear him because he knew that the guy had no future in politics in Iraq, because he was a Christian in a Muslim nation. So some countries, some Muslim nations are, much more tolerant of Christianity and other religions, and some aren't. Iran, of course, is not. I think Morocco, where they have a lot of Western influence, and they've got belly dancing and everything in Morocco, because it's very Western. A lot of Western influence there. As a matter of fact, a lot of times when they're filming movies about Muslim countries or Arab countries, they'll film them in Morocco, but they won't tell anybody, hey, this is not Iran, this is not Iraq, this is not Saudi Arabia, this is Morocco. And the country of Morocco loves the film industry. They invite people to come in, shoot films there all the time. The architecture looks the same, the people look the same, so it works for them. But yeah, I'm sure that Robert Morris probably doesn't want to avoid prosecution in a Muslim nation. Let's see. I think overboard state crimes, the federal system takes over. I don't know. Like I said, I'm not a legal expert. I don't know how this plays out. He says over state border. Don't know, but I don't think this is going to hold up. They want their pound of flesh. Yeah, I think a lot of people are that way. And I'm not saying that I like Robert Morris and I'm on his side. As I've said, I think he's disqualified from ministry. But personally, I don't care if Robert Morris spends the rest of his life rotting in an Oklahoma prison, or if he spends the rest of his life sipping Mai Tais in Tahiti. Doesn't affect me one way or the other. He's gone. He's not in ministry anymore. That's really all I care about. I think some people are being vindictive because they're truly appalled by his crimes, not so much the money aspect, although that's definitely an aspect. Okay, yeah, that's fair. I think some people are horrified by the revelation that, she was only 12 years old. He didn't tell people that at first. Jimmy Evans, after this all came out, Jimmy Evans said, he didn't tell me she was 12 years old. And Jimmy Evans just kind of cut him off. Won't talk to him anymore, from what I understand, even though Jimmy Evans was all gung-ho about him starting Gateway back around the turn of the century. I hear the Lord saying as I listen to this, you are judging people I have not judged. I am bringing justice to cases that have been swept under the rug and not addressed. Possibly. Hey, there's Brother Chris Caps. Good to see you. Let's see. Okay, so that's kind of all the comments that I've got at this point. Like I said, I know a lot of people are going to disagree with me on this because there is this mentality right now that God is cleaning house and these people all need to go down. I've heard people say Joni Lamb needs to be in prison and Doug Weiss needs to go to prison. Dr. Michael Brown needs to go to prison. I mean, in his case, it wasn't even a minor. It was two consenting adults, but it was stupid and irresponsible. And I think Dr. Brown's finished, to be honest with you. I think all of his support has dried up, regardless of how this plays out. As far as a third-party investigation, I think his reputation is tarnished to the point that all the money's going to dry up. So unless he wants to try to make a living off of YouTube ad revenues, I think his ministry is pretty much, I could be wrong. I could be wrong about all of this, but I'm giving you my opinions on things, which presumably is why you're here, because otherwise, I've heard people say before, yeah, I went and watched that Jew and Greek live stream, and he didn't have anything worth listening to, so I went away. I've read those comments in some of these videos, so I know I have my detractors out there. That's fine. I listened to Morris preach once. During his sermon, he stated, I was immoral. Months later, he repeated this during another message. It made me skeptical of him. Yeah, well, a lot of times people trying to give you enough information to make it look like they're being transparent because they figure you're going to find out. You're probably going to find out something about this. I want to get my story out there before you find out. I think Corey Minor did this. Corey Minor was indicted for investment fraud and spent 13 years in a federal prison. And then he got out during COVID and started a YouTube channel. And right out of the gate, he tells everybody that he had been to prison and he learned his lesson. And he gave his story of what happened. And so a lot of people were okay with it, including me. I thought, well, the guy messed up and he's coming clean. Well, it turns out he wasn't coming clean. I'm planning on having Seiko Woods on my live stream in a week or two. Seiko went and got the court records, and he went through the court records, and it didn't support Corey's version of what happened. But Corey, I think he was probably wise enough to realize in this age, information age, people are going to find the information. He just probably didn't count on anybody paying to obtain the court records like Seiko did. And I think that's kind of what happened with Robert Morris. He figured, well, people are going to know that I had some sort of a controversy when I was young. So I'll just put this story out there that I had an inappropriate, this is the way he said it, I had an inappropriate relationship with a young lady. And I went through a restoration process. He didn't tell them that she was a young adolescent. He said a young lady, which left people with the impression that she was not a minor. But she was actually 12 years old when it started. So, yeah, everybody felt like, it's kind of a half-truth there, Robert. You didn't come clean with us. If we'd known that, we wouldn't have supported you. Have you watched First Methodist Church of Pleasanton, Texas live stream for worship service? I have. It's been pastored over the past few months by my friend Scott Camp. And it's really amazing. It's a Methodist church, and he is a tongue-talking Baptist who has been bringing, God's used him to bring revival to the small town of Pleasanton. It's a suburb of San Antonio. Well, not really a suburb. It's probably a half hour away. But he's been pastoring there for a while, and he's been telling me about what God's doing there. It's amazing. But he's not going to be the pastor anymore because he has just taken a new position, and I'll be making that announcement forthwith. Have any prominent ministers spoken about the indictment? Shane Winnings has. I don't know if you would call him a prominent minister or not. He's very well known. I think he's the head of Promise Keepers, something like that. But I haven't heard anything from any like televangelists or anything like that. I have watched that Jew and Greek live stream, no complaints. Well, thank you, CC. Nice to know that there are people out there who listen and find value in what I do. He's preaching in Israel. You sound biased. Childhood destroyed. However, just said when saw notification won't stand in court, it's re-exposing him. Shouldn't be allowed to be a pastor because near children. Yeah, I said he's disqualified from ministry. And biased? How am I biased? I've never met Robert Morris, never supported him. And when the story broke, I came out and did a video on it and told the story about how his church got started because he was mad. And I said he's disqualified from ministry. How does that make me biased? You know, I'm just looking at the law, guys. You know, I'm 68 years old. I've watched stuff like this for years. I don't think this is going to hold up. But like I said, I'm not a legal expert. I could be wrong. But just strictly from a legal standpoint, I don't think it's going to hold up. And that doesn't make me biased because I think that the law... I mean, if you can drag up an old law to charge him with something, what is there to keep old laws from being dragged up to prosecute you about something? You know, it's just like freedom of speech. Freedom of speech works both ways. It doesn't just work for the people you agree with. Freedom of speech protects the people who you don't like and you disagree with. But if you're not going to give them the right to express their views, then why should you expect to have the right to express yours? That's the way this works. The rights of the accused, that applies to all of us. Whatever you think of Robert Morris, he has his rights under our system. And he shouldn't be, in my opinion, he shouldn't be sentenced to life in prison on a 19th century law that was written for cattle rustlers to get around the existing laws that have a statute of limitations. That's my opinion. Do with it what you will. I've never really followed Morris. Hi, Dwayne. Good to see you. Yeah, a lot of people haven't, just like a lot of people never. I think Dwayne actually said he had never watched Daystar when the whole Daystar thing happened. So there are people out there who don't follow this stuff, but for the people who do, who are familiar with Robert Morris, it's interesting how this whole thing is playing out. And Klimble says the same thing. I must admit that I'd never heard of Robert Morris until all of this info came out. Well, if you're charismatic and you're from Texas like me, you probably know about Jimmy Evans and Daystar and Robert Morris. And there's lots of, James Robinson. I actually heard James Robinson preach in my Baptist church back in the 60s. And then James Robinson was the guy that got Robert Morris started in ministry. And then James Robinson had to come out and state publicly that he didn't know that Cindy was 12 years old when this all started. That he wasn't covering up a crime. I don't know much about Morris. I did come across one time a teaching he was doing at his church on the Holy Spirit and the gifts of the Spirit, speaking in tongues. It was pretty good. Unfortunate that he hadn't come clean, and so now he's going to have to go to jail. Well, if he's convicted, if he shows up and is convicted, and the sentence and the conviction are upheld by the appellate courts, but and this is far from over. But it'll be interesting. I'm going to pop some popcorn, see how this all plays out. I had never heard of Seiko Woods until his debate with Fred Price Jr. Yeah, Seiko is an interesting guy. We disagree on theology, but I love the guy. He's the only Reformed guy that I know of who's willing to hold other Reformed people accountable. He did videos about John MacArthur when he kicked a woman out of his church because she wouldn't reunite with her abusive husband. And then he came out with a story on Corey. Seiko sees a lot of idol worship within the Reformed world. Just like we have in the charismatic movement, we have idol worship. We have ministers, superstar megachurch ministers that become idols to people. And that's one good thing about all of the exposing that's going on is we're learning to rethink leadership. What is leadership? Is leadership packing the pews and stuffing the coffers with donations? Or is leadership discipleship? Leading people into maturity in the faith and the grace and the knowledge of the Lord Jesus Christ, whether the church is growing exponentially or not. Leadership, according to Scripture, is about bringing people to maturity in the faith. Wasn't Scott going to be on stream at one point? Yes, we had that scheduled. I'll tell you what happened there. Scott had just come back from Africa. He had been in Ghana for a couple of months. And then he came back. And when I found out he was back in the U.S., I said, "You want to come on a live stream?" And he said, "Yeah." Well, he had jet lag. And since he agreed to it, I just assumed that jet lag wasn't an issue. But then he told me that day, he says, "Man, I haven't slept in over like 24 hours." And he says, "I'm about to crash and burn. I can't go on the live stream tonight." And so I kind of fault myself for that because I kind of had a check in my spirit about it. I thought, well, maybe it's too early to put him on the live stream just a few days after he gets back in the country. After all, he's not young. He's in his 60s now. But I just took his word for it that he was okay. Well, he wasn't. He got to the point where he couldn't keep his eyes open. And so I said, okay, get some rest and we'll have you on later. And then his schedule just never opened up after that. But he has agreed to come on. So he should be on with me next week or maybe the week after. And we'll be talking about some really interesting stuff. Society shouldn't dig up old laws in various states. Anyone remember segregation? Yeah. I actually do remember segregation. When I was a kid, I remember in my hometown, Wichita Falls, back in the mid-'60s, we didn't have a mall back then. If you wanted to go shopping, you had to go downtown. And white people and black people went downtown to do their shopping. But then we went back to our white subdivisions and they went back to their neighborhoods. And that was just the way it was. I remember when George Wallace ran for president in 1968, he was a segregationist. He famously said, "Segregation now, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever." And he won 5 states in the election in 1968. The last time anybody who wasn't a Democrat or a Republican won a state in a presidential election was 1968, George Wallace. He won 5 states. Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, and Georgia. So that shows you how much the country has changed. You would never win a state in a presidential election as a segregationist today, but he won 5 states in 1968. So I remember all that. I remember when we would go to Arkansas to see my mom's side of the family. I remember seeing all those Wallace for president bumper stickers. And I was not used to that. Where I grew up in North Texas, there weren't that many Wallace supporters. But you got over there into Arkansas, man, people wanted George Wallace as president. Strictly from a theological perspective, what are your thoughts on Robert Morris's teaching on tithing, assuming you're familiar with it? Yes, I am. I remember I actually sat in one of his services about 10 years ago and listened to him talking about the blessed life, and he was talking about tithing. And I remember him saying, he was, teaching on Malachi, of course. And he said, I told the Lord, I sure wish you had put that in the New Testament instead of the Old Testament. The part in Malachi about bring all the tithes into the storehouse. Lord, it sure would have been easier for me if you just put that in the New Testament instead of the Old Testament. And the Lord told me I put it right where I wanted it. And then he went on with his teaching. I don't believe in tithing the way that it's taught in charismatic churches. And I know I'm at odds with a lot of well-known charismatics, but to me, New Testament giving is non-compulsory. The Apostle Paul said, not grudgingly nor out of necessity, God loves a cheerful giver. And if you're giving to avoid a curse, I would say that's out of necessity or grudgingly. The tithing was a part of the Levitical priesthood. The Levitical priesthood went away in 70 AD. So no, I don't agree with what Robert Morris taught on tithing, and a lot of people. Creflo Dollar, you remember a few years ago, he changed his position on tithing too. I think Fred Price Jr. has also changed, moved away from the typical Word of Faith understanding on tithing. I should talk about that someday, but I guess I'm going to have to brace myself for all the pushback that I'll get on it. But no, I don't agree with Robert Morris or anybody who teaches that you're cursed with a curse if you don't tithe. And if you do tithe, God's going to just make you filthy, stinking rich. I think it's talking about rain. If you read Malachi, it says, I'll open the windows of heaven and pour you out a blessing. He's talking about their crops. People were withholding the tithes because what if I have a crop failure? Or what if the insects come and eat up? And he says, don't worry about the insects. There'll be plenty of rain. I'll take care of the insects. You just bring the tithes in the storehouse and see if I won't open the windows of heaven and pour you out a blessing. Which if you go back and you read in Genesis about the flood, God used the same expression. The windows of heaven were open and it rained. So I think that's what Malachi is talking about. Of course, that's part of what they tithed was 1/10 of their crops and every 10th animal in their livestock. But if you were a carpenter or a candle maker, you didn't have anything to tithe because tithing was done with food and livestock. It wasn't done if you worked as a service for somebody, or if you made horseshoes or something like that, there was nothing to tithe because you weren't dealing with food or livestock. Okay. Don't watch TBN either. Well, probably not missing much. I don't watch Christian television hardly ever. Every once in a while, I'll turn on something and watch for a few minutes to see what's going on. But as I said before, television, Christian televisions especially, is so entertainment oriented that it just caters to the flesh. There's very little edifying, in my opinion, in Christian television by nature of Christian television being visual. Brother Hagin was not a televangelist. Brother Hagin put his money into radio and print, and his ministry grew exponentially on radio and in print. He just got on the radio and taught. He wasn't flashy, and he couldn't entertain people visually, but it was very effective, the way that he approached ministry. And I think television, I'm not saying there aren't good TV ministries, but there is that tendency, there is that temptation when you get on television to be flashy and entertain people instead of really minister and edify them. I knew of Robert Morris, but didn't frequently watch him. Okay, thank you. Hey, Proverbs 17:11 from Seiko Woods channel. Yeah, I don't know if you were here when I was talking about Seiko or not, but I do hope to bring him on with me in the near future. I want to bring on a lot of people who don't necessarily agree with me theologically, but who I consider friends. We'll see how that plays out. You can be the next guest on Joni's Table Talk. I might, once I get a little bit more up to speed, I might have Dwayne Green come on here and talk about textual criticism. But at this point, I feel like I'd come across as a babbling idiot because so much of this stuff is over my head. Churches should have more resources for victims of clergy sexual abuse. Yeah, and for the poor. I think churches need to put a lot more emphasis on feeding and clothing and helping people get off of drugs. Brother John Elving, who was in here earlier, that's a big part of his ministry, is ministering to the homeless, to drug addicts, people on the streets, because he came out of that lifestyle. And boy, if you ever watch Brother John Elving's channel, people donate shoes and socks and all kinds of stuff to Brother John so he can go and distribute it to the people that he ministers to. But yeah, we do need to do more regarding unwed mothers and clergy SA. Yeah, I think we need to do a redistribution of our resources. Larry Man, pastors need to be held accountable to a board that are not yes men. Yeah, it's just because you got a board doesn't mean that they're not going to be yes men. I mean, even if you're accountable to a board in the Presbyterian structure, a very charismatic, a very dynamic leader can overpower the board that just want to go along with his opinion because he's so well liked and supported. I'm wondering if God was truly involved in Robert's ministry or not. Well, God honors faith wherever he finds it. And if Robert Morris inspired faith in people and they got healed or delivered or they got ministered to, they got saved through his ministry, because he did do a gospel presentation at his church. If people got ministered to, that's great. But like the Apostle Paul says, it's wood, hay, and stubble. In the day of judgment, when our works are judged, it's all going to be wood, hay, and stubble if it wasn't built on the leadership of the Holy Spirit. If God is not in it, it's going to come to naught. Popularity and size doesn't mean God is in it. Absolutely. Are you familiar with Kevin Zadai's ministry? He's a Rhema graduate and has a rather prolific ministry. Any thoughts? I am familiar with his ministry. As a matter of fact, I'm friends with his traveling associate, and we've talked a little bit about other things, but we've never discussed Kevin Zadai. but he has flown around with Kevin all over the country, working with his ministry. And maybe I'll touch base with him. I don't know what to think about Kevin. He's the guy that said that Jesus appeared to him playing a saxophone. And he says that the Lord taught him to play 14 instruments. The problem I had with that, he said the Lord taught him to play 14 instruments. I think it was 14. Might have been 12, 16. I don't know. A lot of different instruments. But then I read what instruments he'd learned to play. And a lot of those instruments are very similar. And me being a musician, I understand it. If you can play the guitar, you can play the mandolin. They're tuned differently, but you fret one end, you pluck the other. And if you can play the mandolin, you can play the ukulele. And if you can play the ukulele and the mandolin and the guitar, you can probably play a balalaika or similar instruments that are plucked and fretted. So you might say, well, I play 6 instruments, but those instruments are the 6-string guitar, the 12-string guitar, electric guitar, the bass guitar. You could list it that way, but it's all basically the same skill. And same thing is true with saxophone. And I think it's clarinet and the saxophone are very similar. My friend Gabriel Bello plays both, and we've discussed this. So now if you could play the guitar and the piano and the trumpet and the drums, okay, those are all completely different instruments. But there was a lot of overlap. And I was, when he listed the instruments that he plays, I was like, yeah, I could play most of those. But, I didn't have a vision of Jesus playing an instrument. So I don't know what to think about Kevin Zadai. But maybe I'll look into him a little bit more. I'd heard that he'd gone to Rhema, but I don't always agree with people who went to Rhema. I'm not real close with Rhema Church or Rhema Bible College anymore. Make the video on tithing, Rod, that and the rebellion being the same as witchcraft teaching. I've actually done a video on prosperity. I think it's Prosperity 101 or I don't know. I did a video about 4 or 5 years ago on prosperity, and I gave my views on tithing in that video. So you want to go to my channel and do a search, you might find that. Tithing was for the purpose of supporting the Levitical priests. Yes. People try to make, you'll hear them say, well, tithing was around before the law. Well, first of all, it wasn't the way that it was conducted under the Levitical priesthood. It wasn't around. Okay, Abraham gave the king of Salem 1/10 of the spoils of war, but he gave the other 90% to the king of Sodom. So he gave it all away. But he didn't pay 1/10 of his income. Who would he pay it to? They didn't have a Levitical priesthood at the time of Abraham. So, and besides that, just because it was around before the law, so were animal sacrifices and circumcision. They were all around before the law, but we don't practice circumcision in the church. We don't practice animal sacrifices in the church. So I don't think that argument holds up. Actually, Rod, do you listen to a lot of teachers, preachers these days? Or do you find yourself mostly just viewing, studying the word yourself? I would say that most of what I learn from reading. I'm a reader. I love to read. And I love to read from people from different perspectives. I actually have a book somewhere behind me. I have a book by James White, who was a Calvinist, but he wrote a book on the King James only controversy. And I've listened to him talk about manuscripts and Erasmus and the Textus Receptus. I've heard him talk about this stuff, and he is a wealth of information on biblical texts. May not agree with his theology, but I do appreciate James White's knowledge about the Bible. And when I say about the Bible, I'm talking about how we arrived at all of our modern translations. I mean, he can tell you all kinds of stuff about the Tyndale Bible, the Luther translation, the Geneva Bible, all of those different manuscripts and processes. And so Brother Hagin used to tell us, don't just listen to people that you agree with. Listen to people you disagree with, because you can learn things from people that don't speak in tongues, or that don't believe in healing. They can still teach you stuff. He listened to a lot of people. He was a voracious reader. Many churches and pastors only promote tithing because of the monetary factor. It's so clear scripturally that it is not a new covenant commandment. I totally agree. And some of them, a lot of them, teach it just because it's what they know. It's what they're familiar with. I don't think they're trying to be greedy or deceptive. I think a lot of them just grew up hearing it taught and they believed it. I used to believe it, but never really studied it. And then once you really look into it, it's hard to see how this fits into the New Testament. Under the reasoning that all believers have come from God, tithe was from the first fruits. Jesus Christ is also referred to as the first fruits, died on the cross for our sin. Yeah, I think a lot of people try to approach tithing from the first fruit standpoint. I have nothing against first fruits. I have nothing against people saying, hey, I'm going to bring an offering from the first fruits, but it's the 10% or you're cursed with a curse. That's the kind of stuff that I can't abide. Okay, maybe biased, not word, but insensitive because you said you don't care and think dislike of him is regarding his money. Well, yeah, I do think, because I hear people all the time talking about how much money he has. But yeah, granted, a lot of people, it's over the allegations. So, maybe I should have been a little bit more nuanced in how I said that. Fred Price Jr. has a book called The Tithe That Binds. I have not yet purchased it, but it talks about the purpose of tithing under the old covenant. Yeah, I think I've heard of that, but I don't have that book. I have his other book on, it's called Behind the Scene, SEEN, and it's talking about the spirit world. And that's a very interesting book. Church is supposed to take care of widows, etc. Absolutely. Now, widows and orphans, as James talked about in the time of the New Testament, widows and orphans didn't have any system there to support them. It's different from today. Today we have orphanages. Widows a lot of times have insurance policies to where they're set up for life, or the woman can go out and work and provide for herself. But back then, it was much more difficult for a woman to provide for herself if she was a widow. And there was no life insurance policies. And so when James talks about taking care of widows and orphans, it's not like today you might have a widow who's, just inherited or just received $1 million because her husband died in a car wreck. And so her house is paid off and she's got money in the bank. Yeah, and go visit her if you want to, but she's not needy like widows were in the time of the Bible. And orphans, being an orphan can be difficult, but it's so much better today for orphans than it was back then, because a lot of times orphans were just on the street, scrounging, begging, because nobody was there, no adult was there to take care of them. We can agree to disagree about tithing and still love one another in the Lord. Some people don't seem to be able to do that, and you can tell it by their comments. Remember that tithing predates and then it runs out. Let's see. Law, and Jesus endorsed it. What Jesus said was that here men tithe. He wasn't telling his disciples to tithe, and it wasn't taught in any of the epistles, but Jesus was talking about under the Levitical system, people tithe. Yeah, that part was true, but he wasn't instructing his followers to give 1/10 of their income. And that's the issue that I have, was the way that it's taught is it's not compulsory. New Testament giving is non-compulsory. Okay, I don't know what you know. What I think most people. Oh, Dwayne's talking about the textual criticism that I was referring to a while ago. No worries. I think it's over most people's heads. It's not talked about often in churches. Exactly. No preacher wants to get up and talk about textual criticism because, a lot of it'll be over most people's heads and people will be bored. And if it is, it's so general, it's not helpful in my opinion. Yeah. I like Brother John Elving. He's Canadian too. Canadian, eh? Yeah. I'm learning about a lot of you Canadians. Lori Lynn Tyler Thompson, I think that's her name, is Canadian. They've got a whole thing. Wes Huff is Canadian. They have a Canadian apologetics network. So go Canada, man. I'm glad to see so many people, so many YouTubers popping up north of the border. Concerning Kevin Zadai's saxophone visitation experience, maybe we should ask Gabriel Bellows where he was that night. Haven't talked to Gabe for a while. He's been real busy building his studio, but when he gets that thing done, hopefully we'll get to do another video or two together. Tithing existed before the law, though. Definitely Jesus put the curse on the cross. So under grace, regarding giving, Wallace got born again, interestingly. George Wallace got born again? I never heard that. I know he changed his position. He said he was wrong to push segregation, but I never heard about him converting to faith. But if he did, I think that's great. And I addressed the tithing before the law thing earlier. I avoid tithing churches because personally I believe they love mammon more than the truth. Yeah, it depends on how they teach it. If they just say, we're going to receive our tithes and offerings, that's fine. That's people are used to saying that. But if they get up there and they teach it and they put people under condemnation, you're cursed with a curse if you don't tithe. And Robert Morris went so far as to say, if you tithe here for 90 days and you don't get a return, or you don't feel like it's benefiting you, we'll give you your money back. He made a money back guarantee on tithing. And as far as I know, they never made good on it. And some people are actually trying to sue the church for their tithes. But yeah, that was manipulative on the part of Robert Morris. That's one of the things that kind of let me know that I just, I had a bad feeling about the guy. I never, I thought about going to the church and I never did. I went through the orientation thing, but never followed through. It is my understanding for New Testament believers, we are to give joyfully and not under compulsion. Yeah, that's exactly what I believe. Faith on Fire. Hi, Brian. Very late to the stream, but good to see you. Yeah, we're discussing some of your favorite topics, like the King James Bible. Brian prefers the King James Bible, but he's not King James only. So he's not going to hold that against me, I don't think. Please make a video listing your favorite authors. I did a video years ago on my favorite pastors. I haven't done one on my favorite authors. I'll tell you right now, a guy that I've always liked going back to the 80s when I was in Bible school, and that's Charles Ryrie. Charles Ryrie was not charismatic. Some people say he was reformed. I don't know. But he wrote a book defending the teaching of dispensationalism. I got it behind me here, 40 years later. And I used that book as a model for my book, Defending the Faith, Word of Faith Apologetics. I loved the way he put his arguments together. Now, I'm not a dispensationalist anymore, but I liked the way that he handled that topic, respecting people that he disagreed with, but setting the record straight on some misconceptions. I saw the way that he did that. It was very compelling, very well done. And I said, that's the way I want to write. And I've got some other books. He wrote a book on eschatology. He wrote a book on the Holy Spirit. And I've also got his book on basic theology. So I could list other people that I like reading their stuff, but Charles Ryrie, as far as theologians, I probably enjoy his writing more than anyone else. But yeah, I'll look into doing a video like that. I'm thankful that Kenneth Hagin did a comprehensive teaching on the 9 gifts of the Holy Spirit. It amazes, though, that churches don't expound on this, even in Word of Faith charismatic Pentecostal churches. I have thought for quite a while about doing a teaching on spiritual gifts and the fivefold ministry. Never have gotten around to. I got so many topics that I would like to get to, but that I just haven't found time. And with the projects I'm involved in right now, I don't know when I'm going to be able to write about all of the stuff that I've wanted to write about, or do videos about stuff I want to do videos about, because I do want to start doing some writing too. I don't think White's treatment of King James onlyism was entirely accurate. His breakdown of types of KJV onlyism is lacking. Okay, well, we should have a discussion about that, because I'm sure you know more about this than I do. You could set me straight on it. No, he's not KJV only. He's KJV good, but not KJV only. Do you plan to do a video on Carlton Pearson? Yes, I've planned on doing that for years. I just got to find the time to do it. And it's probably going to be later in the year before I'll be able to get around to it. And when I say later in the year, I'm talking about the fall. Canada, the 51st state. I hope not. I hope it doesn't become the 51st state, because the liberals and there's a lot of people from countries that don't like us that live in Canada. Just put it that way. They have a parliamentary system in Canada. One of the reasons that we have not ended up like the UK is we don't have a parliamentary system. If we had a parliamentary system, there would be equal representation according to the votes. And so you'd have a lot more emphasis on Sharia law, because you'd have a lot more Muslims in Congress. But we don't have an equal representation like that, because we have a winner-take-all system rather than a parliamentary system. And I prefer our system to the parliamentary system. What's up, Rod? Always interested in what you have to say. Well, I appreciate that, Julie. I think Ryrie's theology was Baptistic. One say yes. Yes. Like I said, I don't agree with him on everything, but I liked the way he wrote and presented his arguments. Best book on apologetics. I don't have a lot of books on apologetics, believe it or not. Because I started my channel 10 years ago, and most of what I've learned about apologetics, I've learned watching videos over the past 10 years. I know enough to know that a lot of what you hear from apologists is garbage. And that's why I did a couple of videos called Apologetics, APPALL, because I think the modern state of apologetics is appalling. There's been so much buffoonery and chicanery in the world of apologetics, including one guy who ran Protestia. It used to be Pulpit and Pen, and now it's Protestia. But the guy who founded it ended up being convicted of drunk driving and assault, a bunch of stuff. I don't want to get off into all that, but I'm just saying this guy was a Christian apologist doing attack videos on people because they weren't representing Christianity very well, and then all this stuff comes out on him. So I prefer the NASB 77, the Geneva Bible KJV, the NKJV, and the YLT. I don't know what YLT is. Dwayne Green and I both have a preference for the New King James. I've read the New King James in my daily devotional Bible for 30 years, and I'm partial to it. It's just what I'm used to. But I've said before, I'm not going to condone or promote or what's the word for endorse. I'm not going to endorse any translation because I think it's a very personal thing, and whatever ministers to you, you should feel free to decide what translation you like based upon your personal relationship with God. And I don't like people that come out and say, that's a demonic translation, or that guy's a heretic, yada, yada, yada. I think we can learn from all translations. That's all I got to say about that. We've been going for over an hour now. You can probably hear my voice is giving out. So, but just to sum up, in case you missed it earlier, Robert Morris was indicted on 5 counts with a law that goes back to the 19th century that I don't think is going to hold up. I think it's going to be kicked out. And I think the Attorney General of the state of Oklahoma who made this decision, I think he's grandstanding, quite frankly, because it's very popular right now to take the side of the victim on this thing. And I think just because they have a statute of limitations, that doesn't keep us from charging him. We'll find some way to charge him. I don't like that. I don't like people who try to do an end run around the norms and current laws just out of politics or out of public pressure. And years ago, if you remember the story of Trayvon Martin and George Zimmerman in Florida, George Zimmerman shot Trayvon Martin. He said it was self-defense. The police investigated. He had an injury on his head. They corroborated his version of what happened with some of the witnesses. And so the police didn't charge him because they said, all the evidence supported self-defense. But then political pressure began to mount. People were calling for him to be tried for murder, charged with murder. And the district attorney wouldn't charge him. He says, the evidence isn't there. The case isn't there. So whoever the powers that be got rid of the district attorney, got a new district attorney. And that new district attorney had the murder charges filed against George Zimmerman, and they put him on trial for murder, and he was acquitted because there was no case, which is the reason the police didn't charge him in the first place, and the original district attorney didn't file charges. They said there's no case here, but they went ahead, got a new district attorney, put him on trial, wasted the taxpayers' money on a case they couldn't win because of political pressure. And, this isn't a murder trial or anything like that, but I do think that there was a certain amount of public pressure that influenced the decision to file the charges, the 5 counts that they did based on an outdated law. And like I said, I'm wrong. I'm not a legal expert. He might be tried and convicted and spend the rest of his life in prison, but I just don't see it at this point. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up. Thanks for joining me, guys. I really do. I don't say it enough, but I do appreciate the support, the financial support, and the viewer support, the likes, clicks, and the subscribes and shares and all of that. I appreciate the support that you give the channel. And hopefully when I get these projects I'm involved in out of the way, I'll be able to ramp things up again like I was doing a year or two ago. So thanks for watching, and hopefully I'll be back next Friday night with a very special announcement. So thanks for watching and good night.